Are you ready to unlock the secrets of making money in property without owning a single property? Stay tuned as I dive deep into the lucrative world of rent-to-rent property investing, a strategy that's transforming beginners into seasoned investors, and a strategy that took me from 6k in savings to a multiple six-figure business. Rent-to-rent property investing as a strategy is one I get asked so many questions about, especially from people that are just starting out and brand new, probably when they realise you can make about £1,000 a month from a property that you don't even own. This is a strategy that I've been using for around 7 years now, and in this video I want to break down exactly how it works. If you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Luke, and on this channel I share with you my 7 years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further, quicker in your own property investing journey. Rent to rent is a phenomenal strategy. There are many ways that you can do it, but first of all, let me just explain the basics of exactly how it works. The concept of rent to rent is really simple. There's a couple of different ways it can work, but the core one, and the one that most people tend to use, is rent to HMO. So let me explain what that actually means. Let's say you take a family house like this, and in this house you have 4 bedrooms and say 3 reception rooms. What you're able to do is rent that property from a landlord and then re-rent that same property out by the room individually. So say you have 6 rooms that you rent out plus a communal lounge. So let's draw that out here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you're renting this property from the owner and you're paying £1,000 a month to the landlord to rent this whole property. Now you're renting these individual rooms out to these tenants here, and each one is paying you around £450 a month. So your £450 times 6 gives you £2,700. So now you're bringing in £2,700 a month, and out of that you're paying the landlord just £1,000. Now it's not all profit, you've also got some operational costs. You've got utilities you need to pay, gas, electric, water, council tax, maybe a bit of maintenance. Some void periods here or there, you need to allocate for those as well. But let's say, for the purpose of the example, you have £700 allocated towards your costs. So then you're left with £2,000. From that £2,000, you pay the landlord their £1,000, and ultimately you're left with £1,000 of profit from a property that you don't even own. The other thing you're able to do is build your knowledge up in this industry quite quickly, because if you're purchasing a property, you're going to be putting an offer in, and that could take at least 2, 3, or even 4 months before it's actually purchased. Then you have to set it up and rent it out. Normally this whole process can easily take around 4 to 6 months, whereas with a rent-to-rent property, you can normally turn the property around within 1 month and start making cash flow immediately. Now, here's the thing with rent-to-rent. I'd always recommend you use this as a stepping stone strategy. So what that means is you build up enough income to really be able to have the time back that you need to be able to focus on starting to acquire assets to build that long-term wealth. So this is a stepping stone strategy to get you the income to get moving forward into actually owning property yourself. What I've been talking about just now is rent to HMO, where essentially we're taking property from a landlord and we're increasing the amount of rent that we can get. Now, before I break down the 7 steps that explain exactly how this works, what I want to do is explain a different way that you can also increase the amount of money that you get from a rent-to-rent property. With rent-to-rent, another way you can increase the amount of income is not by adding more people in the house, which is what we've been talking about earlier with rent to HMO, but actually increasing the amount of income you generate over that month, i.e. renting the property out by the night. And sometimes people call this a short stay model, or serviced accommodation, or even the Airbnb model. What you're doing here is you're renting a property from a landlord, just like we were talking about before, but in this case, what you're doing is you're charging a higher rate per night. Let's say you're charging £100 a night, and let's say over a month or 30 days, you make around £3,000 a month of income. Now of course, there'll be some nights where you don't have full occupancy, but generally, the principle in terms of taking a property on for controlling is similar. But where these two strategies differ is, one, you're putting tenants in each room, i.e. rent to HMO, and on the other one, you're having people pay a higher amount for staying for a shorter period of time. And those are the 2 core strategies people are using with rent to rent. You have rent to HMO, or you have rent to serviced accommodation. Now let's jump into the 7 steps you need to know in order to make these strategies work for you. When it comes to rent, there are many people that get this wrong, and the reason they get it wrong is because they don't understand the fundamentals. These 7 steps I'm going to share with you are not only the ones that we use, but literally the ones I've taught hundreds of people over the last few years how to get this right. As I said, I started doing this around 7 years ago, and when I started, believe me, I didn't have a clue either in terms of what I was doing, but I quickly took the time and effort to learn exactly how to get it right, so that now you don't have to learn with trial and error. You can learn from me for free instead. Step 1 is understanding your operating environment. What do I mean by this? Well, the operating environment is the location where we're going to be working, and what the rules and regulations that apply to that particular sector are. So for example, let's say you're going to do rent to HMOs in Newport, South Wales, where I started. You need to understand that for HMOs, you need planning permission. You might need a license as well. There's certain other obligations that you have in terms of running these houses. So there's national rules and there's local rules as well to think about. The other thing that you also want to understand is who's the accommodation going to be for, who's ultimately going to be living in that property, and what is it that you need to create that's going to be suitable for that type of tenant. And then, of course, it's looking at the market to see who else already exists providing these types of accommodation. Essentially, who's your potential competitors and what kind of job are they doing? Are they doing a very good job, or are they doing a bad job? If they're doing a bad job, that's going to make your life much easier, because all you need to do is do a better job than them. Once you've understood your local operating environment in terms of what you're going to do and where you're going to do that, the next thing you're going to do is step number 2, which is crunching those numbers. By crunching numbers, what I mean is you need to look at, when you're taking this property on from a landlord, how much are you going to be paying? What's your typical market rent for a 4-bedroom house, or a 2-bedroom apartment, or a 2-bedroom house? What's the typical market rent for a 5-bedroom HMO, or a 2-bedroom house? Whatever you're going to be taking on, how much rent should you be paying the landlord? Now, maybe you might negotiate something, maybe a little bit less than market rent. Sometimes you might even have to pay more than that, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But understanding those numbers is your starting point. Then you'll have costs in terms of setting up the property and operating it as well. You've got to look at those costs and be realistic with those numbers in terms of what it's going to cost you to set up and operate that particular business. So ultimately, you can work it out. Is it really going to be profitable? Now, you're not always necessarily going to make £1,000 every single month per property per month. That's a great number to aim for, but ultimately it's a case of what you're happy with, how much you're happy to earn for the amount of effort you've put in. Because let's be real here, there is work involved in getting this strategy working. It's not easy. You're not going to be sitting on a beach, getting a suntan and using a laptop, and hey presto, all the money's rolling in. In the beginning, it requires effort for you to set up and build that business to make it work. So you've got to decide, how much is it you want to earn from all the effort that you're putting in. If you're enjoying this content, I'd like to ask a favour, and that favour is not going to cost you a penny. All I want you to do is click that subscribe button, because this way YouTube will share the content to more people just like you, and it would really help me out. Now, let's get back to the video. The next step, step 3, is to actually go out and find these particular properties. Now that you've understood what you're looking for and where you're looking for, now it's actually about finding these properties. Initially, we're going to be doing desk research, because everything we're talking about right now, most of it will be desk research, stuff that you can sit at your desk and do with your laptop or your phone. And when we're doing some of the searching, we'll be using online portals, and that's something we can still do at the desk. But then ultimately, we have to get out and start looking at these properties, assessing them, getting a feel for the quality of the property, what the location's like, is it as good as you thought it was going to be, and is it going to work ultimately for what you want to do. Now, there are 2 different ways that you can go out and find these properties. The first one is the traditional on-market route. You go and find properties that have been advertised through letting agents, and you go and speak to them about what it is that you do. What you're proposing to them is some kind of guaranteed rent over a period of time, with no gaps and no voids, which means the owner of the property is not going to have any hassle. They're not going to have to deal with any problems on a day-to-day basis because you're taking care of the property. That's essentially your pitch to the owner of the property. Now, it might be through the letting agent, and your job is to communicate that clearly to the letting agent so that they can then relay that pitch to the owner for you. Or alternatively, the other way you can do it is what we call direct to vendor, when we go looking for the owner of that particular property and have a direct conversation with them. So let's say you've now found the property, you've negotiated a great deal. The next step is step 4. You need to get those contracts set up. Now, there are 2 different ways you can actually set up these types of rent-to-rent arrangements. The first one is where you lease the property from the owner. This is traditionally what happens in the commercial world for shops, factories, warehouses and offices, where they're leased from the owner for a long period of time for the occupier to use for whatever they're going to be using it for. And essentially, the principles are the same. You take on a long lease on that property, a long rental agreement from the owner for you to be able to repurpose the property for the way that you're intending. Now, just to be completely clear, you're not hiding anything from the landlord. You're being clear and honest with your intentions because you want them on board and you want them to work with you. The second type of contract, which is probably more common, is a management agreement. Now, with a management agreement, what you have is the ability to be able to manage that property, to do whatever you want with it, to effectively make a profit. The end result is still the same, but the process is slightly different. So it's important that you've got the right kind of paperwork. The key here is, if you sign a lease, you are effectively becoming the landlord of that property, and you are signing up those tenancies and the agreements for people that are staying in the property. On the other hand, if you use a management agreement, then for all intensive purposes, you are now becoming a letting agent, and you need to deal with all the compliance side of that. At this point, you are now spending money. You'll be spending money potentially on deposits, some advanced rent that you're paying on the property, and the property may even need some work doing to it. It might be a little bit of work that you need to do. It could be a lot of work that's required on that particular property. And there's also the furnishing side of it as well. But hey, let's face it, you're trying to make it a much nicer property than it may already be to attract those premium types of tenants, because ultimately that's what it's all about. But that's only going to happen if you get your numbers right. So it's important to understand what setup costs that you might have up front before you actually even get the keys. And for example, your deposit and advanced rent, and then what costs you're going to have to set the property up itself. So you've got costs before you get the keys, you've got costs once you get the keys, and then you've got operating costs as well that you need to think about. And the kind of things we talked about earlier on, such as gas, electric, water, council tax, TV license, internet, cleaners, gardeners, and void periods to think about. But ultimately, if you get this right, you'll be making money. Now that you've created this stunning, beautiful property, you've got to get some people to actually move in and pay you some money. So you've got to make sure that you're out there marketing for the best possible tenants or guests that can stay in that property. There are a number of different platforms that you can use for this, some fairly specialist ones. So for an example, let's say it's working professional tenants that you're looking for, working tenants in an HMO. That's probably the likes of spareroom.com. Websites like that are the largest portals where you can get the most number of people looking for rooms like that. And if it's short term that you're looking at, it's probably airbnb.com or booking.com that you'll be looking at in terms of people staying for the shorter period of time, a few nights a week for example, for that type of accommodation. One of the things I get regularly messaged about, and that we do really well, is not having problems with people staying in our properties. What I mean by that is we're just exceptionally fussy about who we put into the property in the first place as a tenant or a guest, so that the whole business runs smoothly. The last and final step, step 7, is being able to manage those properties in an effective way to ultimately stay profitable, because so many people slip up at this bit because they take their eye off the ball. Once people start moving into it, they forget that they've actually got to look after those tenants, and they've got to look after the property to make sure the property is in top condition to be able to get those premium rents. Because there's no point in you taking on a property from a landlord that might be struggling to rent the property for the money they're looking for because it's just a bit tired, and you're offering the same kind of thing to somebody else. You've got to make it much nicer. You've got to improve the perceived value, but you've got to keep on top of it to keep it nice and make sure you're looking after the property. And if you're doing rent to serviced accommodation, remember, you're in the hospitality business. That means you've got to look after your guests and take care of them to get those great reviews and be able to get people keep coming back to those rooms and properties. If you've made it this far, then I'll say well done to you, because now you understand what's involved. And let me just say again, this is not easy, but the rewards are absolutely phenomenal. And if you're someone who's prepared to put the work in, you can absolutely do amazing things with this business. And remember, it's just a stepping stone. This is a thing that's going to help you build a foundation in terms of income to be able to go on to bigger things, i.e. hopefully buying property yourself. So let's quickly summarize those 7 steps. The first one is understanding your operating environment, knowing the area that you're going to work in, the rules and regulations of that area. Number 2 is making sure you get those figures right, so you understand what's involved in terms of the cost, the due diligence side that you need to do. Number 3 is going out and finding those properties, looking at the right type of properties, doing the negotiations with the landlord, with the agents to find those deals. Number 4 is making sure you've got the right type of contracts and paperwork in place to ensure that you're getting the property in a legal and compliant way for you to be able to operate the way you need to. And the 5th step is about cost. Really understanding the costs and what's involved is ultimately what's going to ensure that you stay profitable. Step 6 is finding the best possible tenants or guests that are going to cause the least amount of hassle and pay us the highest level of rents that we're looking for. And the 7th and final step, of course, is managing those properties, making sure we're on top of those properties and tenants, as well as ensuring that we're providing a great service for them so that it runs as an effective and profitable business. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please remember to like and subscribe, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.